"Don't look under the blanket," she pleaded, her voice a fragile whisper that barely carried on the dry prairie wind. Silas stood frozen, his hands still on the dusty blanket draped over the wagon bed. The sun, a brutal orange orb, was sinking below the horizon, painting the world in shades of fire and blood. He had just arrived, a ghost from her past, a man she had left standing at the altar 5 years ago. Now he found her here on the edge of the world, a desperate plea in her eyes and a secret hidden under a faded woolen quilt. He had come to this dusty, forgotten town with one purpose: to understand, to find out why Alara had disappeared, leaving only a note that read, "I'm sorry. Silas, I can't." Now, a half-decade later, his heart, once hardened like sun-baked clay, was cracking open again at the sight of her. But the woman before him was not the same girl he had loved. Her once bright, fiery spirit seemed dimmed, her eyes holding a weary sadness that went deeper than he could fathom. "Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I came all this way. I need to know why." A shadow crossed her face. She took a step back, her hands twisting in the folds of her skirt. "There are things you don't need to know, Silas. Go back to Denver. You have a life there." "My life is here," he retorted, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated homestead. "With you. Or at least it was meant to be." The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken pain and years of longing. A gust of wind stirred the dust at their feet. It was in that moment of tension, of his love battling his anger, that he heard it. A small pained moan from under the blanket. A jolt went through him. His anger turned to a cold, hard suspicion. He reached for the blanket again, his mind racing with possibilities. A sick child, a wounded animal, a rival. But the terror in her eyes was what stopped him. "Please, Silas, just trust me. Trust." The word was a bitter pill. He had trusted her with his whole life, and she had shattered it. But the love buried so deep was still there, and it won out. He dropped his hand. "All right," he said, his voice defeated. "I won't look, but I'm not leaving." That night, Silas set up a tent a safe distance from Ilara's cabin, watching the silhouette of her moving inside, her movements heavy with a burden he couldn't comprehend. He lay awake, listening to the creak of the wagon and the whispers of the wind, his mind a maelstrom of questions. Over the next few days, their routine became a fragile, silent dance. He would chop firewood and mend fences, and she would leave a plate of food on a stump for him. They rarely spoke, communicating through gestures and the unspoken language of shared history. He saw the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching, a mixture of yearning and regret. It was in those stolen moments that he knew the love was still alive, buried under layers of fear and sorrow. He learned more about her life in their small town. She was a seamstress and fiercely independent. The townsfolk were kind but cautious around her, as if she were a fragile bird that might fly away if startled. Silas heard whispers about a mysterious stranger who had come to town with her, a man no one ever saw. This only fueled his suspicions. One evening, as the stars began to appear, he found her sitting on the porch, a lonely figure in the fading light. He sat beside her, the silence between them less a wall and more of a familiar, comfortable space. "Silas," she began, her voice barely a breath. "You should know, I'm not who you remember. I can't be with you. There's a reason I left. A terrible one. Tell me," he urged, his hand hovering over hers. She shook her head, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I swore I wouldn't. He made me promise." The conversation was a painful dance around the truth, but it was a step forward. Silas realized that whatever was under that blanket was not a stranger, but a part of a story, a dark one, that had held her captive for years. The forbidden nature of their love only intensified his desire to break her free. He found himself thinking of their past, of a simpler time, a time when their love was as vast as the prairie itself, boundless and full of promise. They had planned a life together, a home with a white picket fence, a family. But that dream had been shattered, and now he felt the sting of loss all over again. The tension in the town grew with the arrival of a notorious outlaw named Calder. The man was a monster, known for his brutality and lack of mercy. Silas felt a protective instinct rise within him. He was a good shot, a veteran of a different kind of war, and he wouldn't let this man or anyone else harm Ilara. One night, the inevitable happened. Calder and his gang rode into town. They were looking for something or someone. As they began to tear the town apart, Silas ran to Ilara's cabin. He found her standing by the wagon, her face pale, a shotgun in her hands. "They're here for him," she said, her eyes fixed on the blanket. "Calder knows. He wants what's under there." Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed his rifle and stood in front of the wagon, shielding her. "Stay behind me. I won't let them touch you." The outlaw leader, Calder, a hulking figure with a cruel glint in his eye, approached the cabin. He stopped, his gaze settling on Silas. "Look what we have here. A hero. Step aside, stranger." I have a debt to collect. This is my fight, Ilara said, stepping out from behind Silas. Let them go, Calder. You can take me instead. Calder laughed, a sound like grinding stone. Oh, Ilara, you're a good girl. But I don't want you. I want what's under that blanket. Now move. A shot rang out, a warning shot fired by one of Calder's men. Silas raised his rifle, his finger on the trigger. You're not getting a single thing from this homestead, he growled. Ilara's eyes, filled with fear, darted between Silas and the wagon. She knew what was about to happen. She had to save Silas. She had to save the man under the blanket. She had to break her promise. Silas, listen to me, she said, her voice shaking. I left you for him. He's the reason. I tried to tell you, but I couldn't. The confession hung in the air, a devastating blow. It hit Silas harder than any bullet could. The suspicion he had carried for 5 years was confirmed. She had chosen another man. He felt a cold rage consume him, a fury that burned away all the love he had rediscovered. His hand wavered on the trigger. In that moment of his heartbreak, Calder took his chance. He lunged forward, pushing past Silas and yanking the blanket off the wagon bed. Ilara cried out, a sound of pure agony. The world went silent. The crackle of the fire, the distant shouts of the outlaws, all of it faded away. Silas looked and he saw. A man lay under the blanket, but he was not a rival. He was a shell of a man, thin and gaunt, his skin ashen. A deep scar ran across his face. He was not a threat, but a victim. A man broken by something terrible. He looked weak, frail, and his eyes, though clouded with pain, held a flicker of recognition as they met Silas's. Don't you remember me, son? The man whispered, his voice a dry rasp. It's me, your father. Silas felt the ground give way beneath his feet. His father, the man he had thought was dead for 10 years. The man who had been a hero, a legend, a beacon of strength and honor. This broken thing on the wagon bed was his father. The man he had loved and idolized, the man he had mourned for a decade. Ilara's voice broke through the shock. Calder, she said, her voice full of a cold, hard resolve. Calder, your father is right here. Silas's mind reeled. His father, and Calder. He looked from the broken man on the wagon to the outlaw who looked so much like him, a cruel parody of his father's face. The pieces clicked into place, a puzzle he never wanted to solve. The secret, the debt, the reason Ilara had left him. Calder looked at the man on the wagon, and a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe shame, crossed his face before it hardened again. You're no father of mine, he spat. You left me to rot. I never left you, his father rasped, his eyes filled with a desperate sadness. They took me. They broke me. I was a prisoner all these years. Silas's heart was a gaping wound. His whole life, his entire foundation was built on a lie. He had believed his father died a hero's death, but he had been taken, tortured, and left a shattered man. The faith he had, the faith in the world, in justice, in a good and just God, crumbled to dust. He had prayed for his father for years, and his father had been suffering, hidden from the world, from his own son, from the man he had become. The revelation was a punch to the gut. Ilara hadn't left him for another man. She had left him to protect his father, to protect him from a vengeful brother. Her love for Silas had been so great she had sacrificed everything to keep him from this darkness. In that moment, Silas looked at Ilara, and all the anger, all the bitterness, all the years of pain melted away. He saw the truth in her eyes, the immense love and sacrifice. She had carried this burden alone for him. You knew, he said, the words barely audible. You knew all along. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. He came to me, a year after you left for the city. He was barely alive. He begged me to keep him hidden, to keep the past a secret, to keep you safe from Calder. He made me promise not to tell you, not to let you look. He said it would break you, and it did. It broke him in the most profound way. It broke his faith, his understanding of the world. But it also broke down the walls around his heart. Calder's gang, seeing their leader's hesitation, began to advance. Silas, a man with nothing left to lose and everything to gain, lifted his rifle. Calder, he said, his voice now a steady, steel-cold calm. This ends now. You can take your life, or you can face me. Calder hesitated, his eyes flicking between the two men he had wronged, the ghost of his father and the brother he had never known. The standoff was over. The outlaws, seeing their leader's moment of weakness, knew the fight was lost. They turned and fled, leaving only Calder and the man under the blanket. Calder, a man who had only ever known violence, looked at his brother and the father he had hated for so long. He looked at the family he had almost destroyed. He looked at the man he had become. In his eyes, Silas saw a flicker of the boy he must have once been. I'm not leaving you to rot, Silas said, his voice surprisingly gentle. You come with me, and we face this together. As a family. Calder stood there, a solitary figure under the endless night sky, And finally, he dropped his weapon. The weeks that followed were a blur of healing and reconciliation. Ilara nursed Silas's father back to health, her hands gentle and her heart overflowing with a love that had never died. Silas too had to heal. He had to learn to forgive, to let go of the pain and the betrayal. He had to learn to build a new faith, one not based on a benevolent God, but on the unwavering strength of human connection. He found it in Ilara's eyes, in his father's slow but steady recovery, and in the hesitant, unspoken remorse in his brother's gaze. One evening, Silas found Ilara on the porch watching the stars. He sat beside her, and for the first time in 5 years, he took her hand. "I should have looked sooner," he whispered. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "No," she said. "You were meant to look when you were ready to see. And you were ready to love truly and unconditionally." He knew then that she was right. Their love, forged in loss and tempered by sacrifice, was stronger than it had ever been. It was a love that had survived a broken promise, a devastating revelation, and the long, lonely years of separation. It was a love that could heal even the deepest wounds. Silas looked up at the vast star-strewn sky. He had lost his faith in a world he thought he understood, but he had found something far more profound. He had found a new faith, a faith in the redemptive power of love, in second chances, and in the courage of a woman who had given up everything to save the man she loved. He pulled her close, and under the endless western sky, he finally felt like he was home. No Mires bajo la Manta, she had pleaded, but he had. And in the devastation of that revelation, he had found his redemption and a love that was truly unbreakable.